Hello, my name is Amy Haigh and I'm a postdoc in Teagasc in Moore Park, and I'm involved in the Entail project, which is looking at ways to reduce tail biting, and in particular looking at enrichment that will be viable with slatted systems. And today I'm talking about a tail biting survey that we conducted last August, where we talked to Irish farmers about their experiences of tail biting. We had 58 respondents in total. And we were able to highlight some of their major concerns in relation to tail biting, which you can see from the slide was in relation to particularly condemnation and productivity, because it has been found that condemnation is a major problem. Sometimes a pig that could seem perfectly healthy and have a perfect tail, it may have actually been bitten at the first stage, and actually once it's opened up at the factory, spinal abscesses may have formed, which could lead to partial or full condemnation. And so it's incredibly frustrating for the farmer involved, who might have got a pig completely to the finishing stage, spent 80 or 90 euro feeding it, and then that pig is condemned when they will get no money for it. It's also associated with a loss of productivity of up to about 4 kilograms finishing weight. So it's a major concern, and with our survey we found that 96% of farmers had had some form of biting in the last year. This wasn't always tail biting, but ear biting also, and flank biting. And they were particularly highlighting ear biting to be a problem in the second stage. And in contrast, tail biting, as you can see from the graph, gradually increased and was particularly a problem in the finishing stage. And this again has been found in some of the work in Moore Park that has been done by Laura Boyle and her team, that the finishing time is the major problem with tail biting. And so we also wanted to look at what enrichment was currently being used by Irish farmers, and whether they'd be willing to consider using other forms of enrichment, and 81% of them were. And wood was highlighted as an enrichment that they would consider using. But really their major considerations were things such as the effectiveness of the enrichment and also how long it would last, with about 6 to 7 months being flagged as a viable time frame for something to be actually able to be used. Because obviously when you're dealing with systems where they could have up to 3,000 sows, there's an awful lot of pigs that they would then have to be changing this enrichment for. There was also a preference for hanging forms of enrichment. We also then, after this survey in November of last year, started a trial of our own, looking at compressed straw blocks. Straw has been found to actually meet all the criteria of what a pig needs in enrichment, things such as it being complex and changeable, that it maintains their interest, that they don't get bored of it, and that access isn't limited. But obviously straw just isn't viable with slatted systems, because it would block up the slurry systems and the slurry pumps that we have here. So we wanted to see whether these compressed straw blocks would actually do the same job as loose straw. And so we began a trial last November. That was when our first rep started, and we had 444 pigs involved in that trial. And we separated them into males and females, and we had 8 treatments in all. Half of them were control group that would actually be given kind of standard forms of enrichment, which were things like chains and commercially available chewing kind of devices that be hanging from the ceiling. And the others would be given 2 straw dispense holders that go onto the end of the back wall and release just a small quantity of compressed straw that the pig kind of has to bite at the source, so it doesn't actually, they're so compressed that it doesn't interfere with the slurry system. And then in the second stage, we did the same, but they had more of a robust structure for the control group. And then in the finishing stage, we had the groups were smaller, and again, one group lot had straw, and the others had commercially available hanging toys. And we took a number of measures. So we would look at their behaviour every week, and this was to look at things like biting behaviour, aggression, and also interaction with the enrichment device, whether using one device more than the other. We also, every 2 weeks, would look at each pig individually to look at signs of tail or ear damage. Also, we had 10 pigs per pen that we actually trained to chew on a piece of cotton, which would we could then measure saliva levels, and this was to see whether there was a variation in stress levels between treatment, were the ones getting straw less stressed than the control group. And these samples are actually being analysed at the moment, so we don't actually have the results from all of this. We then weighed pigs individually at the end of each stage to see their growth rate and how they were doing, and whether we were having a difference between the two treatments. And we followed the pigs right through and actually went to the factory with them and examined their tails just prior to death. In the pens, it's not always possible to see some of this damage. We were then also able to see whether any of them condemned and what they were condemned for, and was any of this in relation to tail damage. So Rep 1 actually went this week, so we followed those right through to the factory this week. So we're just looking at the results of that, and Rep 2 is still ongoing. But we found in terms of straw usage that it actually really varied between the pens. So you would have some pens that you were constantly having to replenish these straw blocks, and others that you weren't at all. And we worked out from Rep 1 that the cost per pig would be about around $171 per pig to have it from weaning to finishing. But we actually didn't find a difference actually in behaviour between the controls and the straw groups. So obviously other things might have to be taken into consideration about other factors that could have contributed. But from the initial results, it doesn't seem that straw would possibly be a viable option just because of how often some of the pens had to be replenished. We just don't know if it would be viable for farmers to use, given that we didn't see a major improvement. But we didn't see a difference in weight gain, but we did see patterns in behaviour, so particularly that the actual biting behaviour really was happening initially from weaning. So even in that first week after weaning, we were seeing tail biting occurring when they were being fed on the creep. But at that stage, you weren't really seeing the signs of the lesions, but really they peaked in the second stage, that you were seeing the greatest amount of ear and tail damage. And then by the finishing stage, there was still some damage, but not as apparent as it was in the second stage. But we did find a sex difference. We found that the females were performing a lot more abnormal behaviours, such particularly ear biting. So they were biting the ear significantly more than the males. But the males were more aggressive, and aggression was particularly high in the second stage.